Thanks for tuning into today's podcast. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our new remote training here at RPP. We've been offering remote training for quite some time, but we always required the athlete to come in-house for an assessment. Now we can do the whole assessment online and bring all of our services, pitching, hitting, and strength training to your doorstep. So, if you like what we do and how we do it, go to our website at rocklandpeakperformance.com and click on Remote Training in the toolbar. Thanks. The Behind the Scenes Podcast. I'm your host, Nunzio Signore, looking to bring you great dialogue with some of the best in the world of player development. The world of training baseball players has changed dramatically during the past few years, and I'm looking forward to shedding some light here on what's the latest, what's the best, and what's really happening in the world of player development. Thanks for joining me for the ride. Hey guys, what's up? Today I'm flying solo, and I figured I would address a few questions that I had viewers contact me on social media. I'm in the Hamptons on a little bit of a Labor Day weekend, so doing this remotely, sound quality may be a little less, but the content will still be just as good. So question number one is, how do you implement VBT, velocity-based training, in the off-season? So first we have to talk about what VBT actually is. VBT is merely giving us bar speeds that coincide with a percentage of a 1-rep max. And that we use that percentage to create a specific adaptation. So for example, generally when we're looking at a 1-rep max and we're trying to train absolute strength, we generally do that between 85 and 100% of our 1-rep max. If we're trying to train power, that can range anywhere from 40 to 70, 60%, 70% of our 1-rep max based on the type of power we're trying to train. We'll talk about this in a little bit. And if we're trying to train speed, we're looking for, bar speeds or body speeds of over 1.0 to 1.3. So to help sum it up a little better for those of you who are really not familiar with VBT, these training adaptations and these speeds are geared towards the load. Obviously, if we have a higher load on the bar, we're moving that bar slower. That's going to give us a slower bar speed. If we're moving a lighter weight, we're going to move the bar faster, and that's going to give us a faster bar speed. These correlate to what we're trying to train, whether it's strength, power, or speed. And there was a study, I think by Jaidovtsev, that stated that these speeds correlate up to 98, I believe, percent accuracy as to traditional 1-rep max testing. So that's a big bang for the buck when we're trying to make sure guys are using the right loads as well as autoregulation recovery. So these are the two main reasons that we use VBT. I love it for the recovery factor as well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So as far as implementing VBT in the off-season, we first have to know what phase of training we're in the off-season. Are we trying to get strong? Are we trying to get more power? Are we working on speed? So knowing those speeds, like I was mentioning before, is crucial. Anything under 0.50 meters per second is going to be training max strength, where the highest force production, highest recruitment of the fast twitch fiber. This is equal to roughly 85 to 100% of an athlete's 1-rep max, anywhere between 0.50 and below. This is the absolute strength phase that we're training in the early off season to get these guys strong. Once we get them strong, we're going to start working on force production and how well and how quickly they can produce that strength. And we're going to start in what we call accelerative strength. This is where athletes have been found to produce the highest rate of force development and power in this range due to there's still a fairly high load combined with faster velocities. And this is equal to roughly 60 to 80% of an athlete's 1-rep max. As far as speeds go in accelerative strength, we're looking for anywhere between, say, 0.53 to 0.83 meters per second. Some people call this submax strength at 60 to 80%. I call it accelerative strength because it's really working on the athlete being able to accelerate through an entire movement. There's enough weight there that we don't have to worry about them decelerating their body like they have to when they're training power and speed. So after we get them strong, then we work on applying that strength a little quicker. We're going to work on low and high load power. Different athletes will produce their peak power somewhere within this larger range. This is a pretty big range. Like I said before, it's somewhere between 40 and 60 to 70% of an athlete's 1 RM based on their strength. This all depends on the maximal strength of the athlete. The stronger the athlete is, the higher percentage he will use to create peak power. We will gauge power output at this point instead of bar speeds to let us know where that athlete is producing his peak power, and we will have them work at that speed. And it's interesting because you can work at 110 pounds and you're producing X amount of watts of power. Then you can go to 120 pounds and you produce a little bit more because the weight went up. But then you go to 130 pounds and you're actually producing less. So we know that that sweet spot is 120 pounds, and the athlete will work there and he'll keep monitoring his power, trying to bring that weight up 5 to 10 pounds every week to see if we can still create maximum power, start to use higher loads, and we know we're getting more powerful. And then once we're getting close to the end season, we start to implement some speed training. This would be our ballistic moves, our jumps, our work on the Proteus machine. And other than our jumps, we really don't measure speed with VBT because we're not actually using any kind of weight. We don't do any weighted throws other than med ball. We don't measure our med ball for speed. All of our speed measuring is done with a belt around the center of mass to get the most accurate reading of how fast an athlete's moving. And we'll work that into our PAP training, which is post-activation potentiation, which I'm going to talk about in the actual periodization period right now. And sorry if I'm moving a little quickly on this. This is not a podcast only about VBT. This is one of 3 or 4 questions that I'm going to answer. So if you'd like to look into it deeper, I have a book out released by Human Kinetics entitled Velocity-Based Training: How to Apply Science, Technology, and Data to Maximize Performance. And you can get into it way deeper there, and it will give you speeds. It will give you the concept, how it was originated. It's a full-blown analysis of VBT and how to use it to improve performance in athletes. So once we know our speeds, we need to know where the athlete is starting. When is he starting? Different athletes can start at different phases based off of the athlete's lowest hanging fruit and what kind of shape they're in when getting back into the gym. For example, we can have a guy who is strong as an ox and really doesn't need to work on that much max strength, but he's got a lot of what we call slow strength, and we need to train him with more power. We may just start training him in a power phase immediately in the off season. It's not where most guys start, but in the early off season, how we usually start is by training what we call a phase called tissue prep. This is where we're trying to improve the tensile strength and work on getting guys good in isometric holds in lower positions. Really try to build a little bit of hypertrophy while they're not starting a throwing or they're not taking reps behind the plate batting yet, because it does create a lot of soreness, and we don't want to use a tissue prep or a hypertrophy phase or anything that causes a lot of soreness when throwing starts. So early in the off season, we'll use that tissue prep, and there's no VBT because it's a lot of holds and we're not working on speed. In the mid-off season, we're going to switch over to heavier loads, and we're going to start to get them strong. With our less experienced athletes, we'll use that accelerative strength because it does use a lower percentage, that's 60 to 80% of 1 rep max. And then for our more advanced athletes with a higher training age, we'll actually start them right into max strength after a tissue prep phase and work at 85 to 90, 92% of a 1 rep max. And like I said before, this is generally somewhere between 0.30 to 0.50 meters per second. In the later off season, we'll begin to use what we call PAP, or transfer to power. This is where we're going to do something in a force production mode, 65 to 75%. That's that 0.50 to 60, and we'll immediately follow it by a ballistic exercise. So, for example, we may have guys doing a hip bridge at 65 to 75% of a 1 rep max, and we'll follow it by a squat jump or a CMJ jump where we're actually activating a prime mover such as the hip in a hip lift, and then potentiating that same prime mover with a jump. Or we can do the same thing with a bench press and then into seated quick rapid med ball slams against the wall. The VBT numbers in the PAP phase, when we're using that force production phase, that is somewhere in the vicinity of 5.0 to 6.0, where we're looking for that 65 to 75%, followed by a ballistic exercise where we're looking for where an athlete creates the most power. So we'll look at VBT for the actual activation exercise that's heavier. We'll look at meters per second, and then we'll switch over to looking at peak power readings off of the app, and we'll use the ballistic movement. We'll look and see where they're producing peak power. And finally, later in that off season, we're going to do a conjugate type training where we're going to do a combo where we maintain some of that max strength that we build up for one day or a part of their workout, and then we'll work on power on another day, and then we'll work on power endurance, how well they can maintain their power output. So on our max strength day, once again, we're looking for 85 to 92%. That is under 0.50. When we're doing our power training on those days, we're looking for anywhere between 40 to, I said, 60 to 70%, and that could be anywhere between 0.70 to 0.90 meters per second. And once again, this varies from athlete to athlete. So to summarize, early off season, tissue prep, no VBT. Later in the early off season, we'll start to train strength if that's what we need to work on, and we're looking for numbers between 0.35 and 0.50, which change based off of training age, and that's 85 to 92% of a 1 rep max. After we get strong, we're going to train transfer to power. We're going to use that strength and move fast with it. Generally, we like to use percentages between 60 to 75% of 1 rep max, 0.50 to 0.60, and that's followed by a ballistic exercise where we're looking for peak power off of the app. And then later in the off season, where we're looking for a little bit of max strength to maintain that strength, and then we're looking for a little bit of power to maintain that power, and then we're going to train power endurance using what we call clusters, where we'll do 2 series of 6 sets of 3. So we may use a CMJ jump, and we'll have them jump 3 times every 10 seconds, every 20 seconds, and we'll have them do 6 sets of that, and then we'll actually take a 2 or 3 minute break, and we'll do another series of 6 sets of 3 jumps. So I hope this clarifies a little bit of how we periodize strength and power using VBT in the off season. And like I said, if you want a lot more information on this, you can look into my book. Question number 2. I have a problem maintaining my velo as it gets deeper into the game. Is this trainable, and how? Okay, the quick answer is yes. Within the anaerobic system, there are 2 categories, the alactic system and the lactic system. Of our 3 energy systems, aerobic, lactic, and alactic, the alactic system produces ATP the quickest, but it's the least efficient of the 3 systems at sustaining it. Because of the high intensity nature of throwing a baseball 95 plus miles an hour, the primary system being used here is the anaerobic system. So with a single pitch only lasting anywhere between 1.5 to 3 seconds, the alactic system is a pitcher's premium choice for energy supply. I really began getting into this type of training about 10 years ago when I was training an athlete in the Cleveland Indians organization, and he was having a problem. He was coming out roaring, but within 3 innings, he was gassed. So I had remembered something that Mike Boyle said, I think it was, watch the athlete, not the sport. In other words, if I'm looking at a soccer game, I'm going to look at, if I'm training a forward, I'm going to look at the timing, the energy system needs of a forward as opposed to a halfback or a fullback or a goalie. The same goes for baseball. The energy needs of a pitcher who is continually producing a rapid movement with different intervals of rest in between over and over again is different than a left fielder who may spend 3 innings without having to move at all. So after reviewing 2 innings of baseball at different levels, I actually sat down one Saturday. I watched it, international ball from Japan. I watched pro ball, collegiate, and high school. I determined that pitchers throw an average of about 12 pitches per inning, with approximately 20 seconds to 30 seconds of rest in between pitches based on, it's a little different if something gets fouled off. It's a little different if there's a hit. But basically, this is on the short side of what most pitchers will experience in a game, assuming the ball is not fouled off, like I said, or put in play. We chose to work in these parameters to see what peak heart rate would be during a fast-paced inning. Using this data, we also know that a strong aerobic base is needed. This is important. A pitcher with a poor aerobic base would not be able to maintain this energy production and end up gassing out due to the gradual increases in heart rate from pitch to pitch or inning to inning. That residual slow increase, what we call cardiac drift, his heart rate will slowly get higher and higher and higher from him not being able to recover in between bouts of pitches. So what he may eventually get to 180, 190 beats a minute, and he's not going to be able to throw as hard. This will translate to a loss in velocity or command in later innings, and even poorer recovery long-term in between games if you're looking on a grander scale. For relievers, this can be even more crucial as they need to be ready to go at all times. These guys may need to throw 2 games in a row. So they need to adequately recover in between games as opposed to a starter who has a 5-day, 6-day break in between. So to train this, we incorporate a method called explosive repeats later in the offseason. This method is a great way to train the body's ability to quickly regenerate adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, which is what makes our muscles move by increasing the enzymes involved in energy production. 2 examples of different exercises you can use with pitchers to enhance this ability in a sport-specific manner are split squat jumps and Haydn variations. It's important to coach your athlete, let me just say, to go all out and aim to maintain the same number of repetitions in each set. This will let us know if he's fatiguing, but going all out, as you would if you were pitching, is crucial. We use the work-rest ratio of 6 seconds. We want them to do something really explosive as if they were pitching for about 6 seconds, not too long. And then we'll take 20, 25, 30 seconds off, depending on how conditioned the athlete is, to simulate the time between pitches, and a total of 12 reps to simulate the average amount of pitches thrown in a short inning. So, for example, we may have the athlete do reactive Haydns or some sort of Haydn variation that's very ballistic and fast, really using a lot of rate of force development, and we'll have him do reactive Haydns for 6 seconds, take a 20-second break, and then we'll have him do 12 of those, and then we'll have him take maybe a 3 or 4 or 5-minute break to simulate a break between an inning, and then we'll have him do that again. And we can use this and do as many reps of this as we can as the athlete's work capacity gets higher. So to summarize, pitchers lie in a different place on that power capacity continuum than other ball players, such as outfielders. The alactic energy system can be trained for both power and or capacity for duration. The aerobic system is what drives all other energy systems and is a key target when developing general work capacity and helping with recovery. So developing the aerobic system, work capacity, in early off-season before transitioning to alactic sport-specific work capacity is important to help recover quicker once the intervals get shorter. So in order to make that easier to understand, we're going to do a lot of slower, weight training with shorter breaks, things that will work the aerobic system before we jump right into this really ballistic alactic sport-specific work. Also, choosing the appropriate exercise and work-rest ratioed methods appropriate to the position is essential when setting up the training week. So that is, once again, study the work-rest ratios required for the athlete, the specific position, not the game. So question number 3. I have perpetually tight hamstrings. No matter how much I stretch them, they're always super tight. First, it's important to point out the hamstrings serve several important functions. One of the key functions is bend or flex the knee. Another key function is to assist in extending the hip. In other words, they move the upper leg, the femur, backwards in relation to the pelvis. Also, they serve to assist with rotating the legs inward or outward. And I think one other function of the hamstrings that is often forgotten is they're a huge stabilizer for the pelvis, because where the hamstrings attach, they help prevent your pelvis from tilting forward into an aggressive anterior tilt. If you're not using your glutes properly, those hamstrings are going to hang on for dear life, helping you try to stay out of that tilt and try to help you keep out of some debilitating back pain. It seems that athletes love to stretch their hamstrings. I used to be the same way, often to the point of overstretching. I always tell people a muscle can be tight, like a really small, tight spring, where you can't have any movement of it. And then you can also take a spring out of a ballpoint pen, and it's not very tight. It's actually pretty loose. But if you stretch that spring all the way out till it is tight, now it's tight. But the first one is tight because it's short. The second spring is tight because you've stretched it to the end range and it's long. So a lot of athletes, because of anterior pelvic tilts, their hamstrings are long because of the position of their pelvis stretches out that hamstring. And then what they try to do is they try to stretch it more. So what they're actually doing is they're overstretching something that is already stretched out past where it wants to be. So putting extra sugar in overly sweet coffee to try to make it taste better. You're just, compounding the issue. And like I said, we see this problem with our athletes who come in and present with a crazy anterior tilt during their assessment. And it's a lot of guys. I would say probably 75% of youth athletes, the baseball players that we see, come in with huge anterior tilts. We already know we've got tight hamstrings. And it's not just your hamstrings. When your pelvis is unstable and anteriorly tilted, you'll compensate by arching that back and using your muscles of your lower back. And for some athletes, that can end up being really bad lower back pain. Since your ribs are connected to your spine, as you arch your back, your ribs will also become elevated in the front, and this will put you in a state of propulsion, I like to call it, where the ribs come up, which makes you quad dominant, forward moving, and it makes it actually even hard to decelerate when it's time to stop, like as in when you're trying to block with the lead leg. This rib positioning will also negatively affect your ability to breathe effectively with your diaphragm, and it will also close down the acromial space, making it harder for the arm to get efficiently overhead. So when that pelvis is tilted forward, the hamstrings can feel like they're short and tight, and their first inclination is to stretch them. But if we were to perform an active straight leg test where we put the athlete lie on their back on a table and see if they can raise their leg up to 90 degrees, and we saw that it was tight and they couldn't do that, and we simply had them activate their glute and activate their abs to kind of get that anterior tilt even when they're in the supine position to get a little bit more posterior back to neutral, we'll see them get a lot of actual higher degrees of movement with their leg closer to that 90-degree mark without doing any stretching at all. Just use activating the glutes and the anterior abs to get them out of that anterior pelvic tilt and giving those hamstrings some natural length without stretching. And pain site versus pain source. I don't remember if it was Gray Cook or Mike Boyle or both of them who brought this to the attention of the training community. But in essence, just because you feel hamstring tightness doesn't mean that the hamstrings are actually the source of the problem. It's very common for athletes with lumbar disc issues to present with radiating pain down into their legs like sciatica, into the hamstrings. And they'll try and stretch and stretch and stretch when actually this for me would be an example of where I would have to refer out an orthopedist or a chiropractor to see if they can work on freeing up that disc a little bit, because there's not much we're going to be able to do in the gym to help them out with any kind of bulging or herniated discs. And then you may actually just have truly tight hamstrings from sitting all day due to the pelvis being posteriorly tilted. Physical therapist Mike Reinhold wrote a great article called Sitting is the New Smoking. I highly suggest you guys look at that. And a lot of our young athletes from sitting all day, being in kyphotic positions, being in class, just, not playing multiple sports, they're in these less than optimal positions most of the day. And there's not much we can do an hour in the gym if they're not being aware of it. So making your athletes aware of good posture, trying to get up every once in a while, try to watch that kyphotic position when they're on their phones all day. This would be the first step to get these athletes in better positions. And then, of course, some stretching and some good manual therapy is definitely in order, but it needs to be followed by core stability work to maybe help cement that new posture in. Charlie Weingraf always had a great statement: get long and then get strong. So in summary, know why your hamstrings are tight. Is it a pelvic tilt? Could it be some disc issues? Or could you have truly tight hamstrings? What you do to help free up that tension is based off of why it's there in the first place. And finally, question number 4, do your strength training programs vary by age? And how do you deal with different size and strength factors with multiple athletes when training in the private sector? This is a really great question, and we really can't have a great discussion about training on athletes without first talking about long-term athletic development. While size and physical maturity are genetic factors that are out of our control, we certainly can take them into consideration when building an athlete's program over the span of 3 to 5 years. Playing multiple sports, working on year-round strength and mobility mechanics, throwing an arm care over the long haul will help provide the best chance for these young athletes to succeed. Don't wait until later in high school to get started in a strength training program. Here at RPP, we break down our off-season programs into 4 buckets: size, arm care and health, strength and athleticism, and mechanics, and a great throwing program. So let's talk briefly about each one. First off is size. This is plain and simple. Get a knife and fork in your hands, get into the kitchen, and eat. Make sure you're getting the right amount of calories. We're not going to get into nutrition and calorie count right now, but many young athletes come in and they're very underweight, especially for their size. This can lead us down into a rabbit hole of a huge amount of problems, for anywhere from lower back pain, arm health, Tommy John. We can get into that on another day, but first, size matters. Number 2, arm care and health. While throwing a baseball builds resiliency and durability in the soft tissue, it does make the arm tight and tired. Getting into a great year-round arm care program as part of an athlete's long-term athletic development is essential in maintaining good arm health. Number 3, lack of strength and athleticism. Producing and redirecting and dissipating force requires total athleticism. This includes full body strength and power and mobility training of both the upper and the lower body, and in both linear and rotational development of the core. A great year-round strength training program as part of an athlete's long-term athletic development should address all these variables. And due to the transition to the big field, there is more stress placed on the body, particularly at the arm and shoulder in these athletes when they're making that transition. We see parents come in a lot concerned with arm pain, and it's due to them not being used to the transition to this big field. So this, combined with a lack of core strength in arm, shoulder, and strength and stability at an early age due to the fear of strength training early on, is a recipe for disaster. And I say the fear of strength training because I watch young athletes come in with their parents, and their parents want to know how we can get their velocity up. And as soon as you talk about strength training, they get the fear of God in their eyes, and they say, I don't want my son to get hurt. Let me just make something clear. Kids get hurt from throwing too much. They don't get hurt in the weight room. Another myth is strength training will stunt an athlete's growth. Current observations indicate no evidence of a decrease in stature in children who regularly perform resistance exercise in a controlled environment. Furthermore, a growth plate fracture has not been reported in any youth strength training study. Moving on, looking at mechanics, fixing energy leaks in the delivery, and learning to retension the throw to help us create a more stable and consistent release point from throw to throw should be a part of every athlete's long-term athletic development program, combined, once again, with a great strength and mobility program. And finally, a great throwing program. A great throwing program is not 8 to 10 weeks. It's year-round, working on velocity, command, situational pitching. This also includes adequate time off the mound for adequate recovery. When I say time off, I don't mean a complete shutdown, but 8 to 10 weeks of just light catch is a great plan for a good long-term athletic development throwing program, and it should include this year-round schedule that coordinates all of the above: the deload of the light throwing, working on velocity, then working on command, and then working on situational pitching. We kind of do it in that order. We don't want to work on our command before we work on velo if that's the lowest hanging fruit, because our command will change as velo goes up. So I hope this was informative for everybody this week. Please continue to send in questions if you have them. There will be times when I'm flying solo like this, and this will be the time I will use to answer those questions. You can reach me at Nunzio Signore on Twitter. You can reach my facility at www.rocklandpeakperformance.com, and we'll see you on the next one.